Welcome to the Remedify Coaching Program podcast.
It's great to be here.
Today we're diving deep into some fascinating questions surrounding the biblical text.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be exploring these questions through the insights offered by Mike Riddle and the team at creationtraining.org.
Yep.
You've brought some really compelling material to the table.
I think so.
And our goal today is to unpack these points, in a way that's both clear and engaging.
I like it.
So our listeners can really grasp the logic and the scriptural basis behind the responses provided in this material.
Awesome.
We're going to be covering a range of topics from the creation account in Genesis all the way to considerations of scientific dating methods.
Yeah, those are always fun discussions.
Exactly.
What I find so fascinating about the questions surrounding the biblical narrative is the sheer variety and the depth of inquiry they represent.
Right.
The resources you've shared really tackle some of the most common sticking points for people those who might have doubts or maybe just come from different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And what's great is that they offer these reasoned answers that are deeply rooted in Scripture.
Exactly.
So we're going to be looking at things like the creation week itself.
Right.
The logistics of Noah's Ark.
How did they all fit?
How do they all fit?
Yeah.
And even delve into the implications of things like carbon-14 dating.
Yes.
It's not simply about having an answer ready,
Mm-hmm.
but it's about understanding the why behind it.
Right.
The scriptural basis, the foundation that informs these viewpoints.
I love it.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in.
Okay.
One question that often comes up is, how could Adam have possibly named all the animals?
That's a classic.
It just seems like such an impossible task.
It does when you think about it.
Right.
On the
Yeah.
surface, at least.
Yeah, when you think about it at first glance.
Right.
Okay, so let's unpack this assumption a little bit. What's the first key insight here?
Well, I think the first really key insight, and the sources you've provided do a fantastic job of highlighting this, is that Genesis 2.20 doesn't actually say that Adam named all creatures.
That's a good point.
It's a really significant clarification.
Yeah.
The text specifically mentions livestock, beasts of the field, and birds of the air.
Mm-hmm.
So right away, we see a more focused scope.
Right.
It's not this overwhelming picture we might initially imagine.
That's a really good point, because when you think about the sheer number of species we have today,
Oh my goodness.
like all the fish, the insects,
Everything.
everything,
Yeah,
it's clear that those weren't part of this initial naming task that's described in Genesis 2.
that's right.
However, Genesis 1 does talk about animals being created according to their kinds. Could you elaborate a bit on what's understood by this concept of kinds in this context, and,
Sure.
and how that relates to the vast biodiversity we see in the world today?
Absolutely. And that's where it gets really interesting, because we're connecting it to modern biology and our understanding.
Right.
The biblical concept of kinds isn't quite the same as our very specific scientific classification of species.
Okay.
It's generally understood to be a broader category,
Mm-hmm.
more akin to the family level, if you're thinking in terms of taxonomy.
Okay.
So think about it this way. You have the cat kind,
Okay.
which would include lions, tigers, leopards, domestic cats.
All very different.
All related but distinct species within that original created kind.
Right.
And you have the dog kind, encompassing wolves, coyotes, or pet dogs.
Right.
So while we have literally millions of species today,
Amazing.
the number of original created kinds is estimated to be much smaller, likely in the thousands.
Okay.
Initially, the material you shared suggests around 11,000,
Right.
but then refines that number to about 2,000 creatures that Adam likely named.
Okay, so that makes the task seem much more manageable.
Exactly.
It's still a lot of animals, but 2,000 is a lot different than millions.
Oh, absolutely.
And the material even does a quick thought experiment to show just how feasible it would be
I love those.
to name around 2,000 creatures.
Right.
And here's where it gets really surprising.
Yeah.
If Adam were naming at a rate of, say, 5 creatures per minute,
Mm-hmm.
how long would that actually take him?
Well, that raises a fascinating question about the efficiency of that first naming endeavor.
Right.
So let's do the math.
Okay.
At a rate of 5 names per minute,
Uh-huh.
Adam could name roughly 300 animals in just 1 hour.
Wow.
And if we extend that time frame
Oh,
in under 7 hours, essentially a single workday, he could have named around 2,100 creatures.
that's amazing.
It really puts it into perspective,
Right.
especially when we consider the estimated number of kinds that were likely brought before him.
Right.
This time frame seems entirely plausible within a single day.
Yeah.
So the key takeaway here isn't just that Adam named animals, but that based on what we see in the biblical text,
Right.
it was a surprisingly manageable task, likely completed in a single day.
Wow. That really reframes the way you think about it.
Yeah.
So let's move on to another big question, one that has definitely sparked a lot of discussion and even skepticism.
Okay.
How could Noah possibly fit all the animals on the ark?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It sounds like an unbelievable logistical challenge.
It does at first glance.
Right.
When you consider the sheer scale of animal life on Earth, it can seem really daunting.
Absolutely.
But the resources you shared do a great job of breaking this challenge down into 3 core questions.
Okay, I like this.
First, how did the animals even get to the ark?
That's a good question.
Second, what were the actual dimensions, the size of this ark?
Right.
And third, and perhaps most importantly, how many animals actually needed to be on board?
Okay, yeah, let's start with that first question then. How did all those animals get there?
Well, Genesis 6.20 gives us a pretty direct answer. It states, "Of the birds after their kind of animals, after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind, 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive."
So it wasn't Noah having to go out and round up every single animal.
It doesn't appear that way.
The text seems to indicate there was a divine element involved in their arrival.
Exactly. That's a crucial point that's often missed in these discussions.
Right.
Now let's look at the size of the ark, because that's really important in addressing this question.
Okay.
Genesis 6.15 provides the dimensions in cubits.
Right.
It says it was 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high.
So for those of us who aren't familiar with cubits, how does that translate into measurements we can more easily visualize?
Yeah, that's a good point, because cubits aren't exactly a common unit of measurement these days.
Exactly.
We're using a standard cubit measurement of approximately 18 inches. The ark would have been roughly 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high.
Wow. To give our listeners a real sense of scale, that's about 1.5 football fields in length.
That's huge.
Yeah.
If anyone's picturing a little wooden boat,
Right.
that really changes the picture.
Yeah, it really does.
It's a massive vessel.
Absolutely. And the source goes on to say that the total volume is estimated at around 1.5 million cubic feet,
Wow.
with a total floor space of approximately 100,000 square feet.
That's a lot of square footage.
It is, and the source even provides this really striking comparison,
Okay.
equating the ark's capacity to that of 522 railroad cars.
That is a helpful analogy.
Yeah, it really is.
Because we can all kind of picture a train with all those cars.
Right.
And to think that that's the equivalent of the ark's capacity, it really drives home the point
It does.
that this was not a small vessel.
It was massive.
Yeah.
And that leads us to that critical question of how many animals were actually required on board.
Right, because as we discussed earlier with Adam naming the animals,
Yeah.
it wasn't about taking every single species.
Right. It was about representing the kinds.
Exactly. Genesis 6.2 specifically says 2 of every kind. And furthermore, the context suggests that only land-dwelling creatures with the breath of life needed to be on board.
Okay.
So things like marine animals and insects, they weren't included in this requirement.
That makes a huge difference right there,
It really does.
just in terms of the sheer numbers.
Absolutely.
The source mentions an assumption of a maximum of 50,000 creatures needing to be on the ark,
Oh,
but emphasizes that it was 2 of each kind.
right.
And given our understanding from earlier that kind is a broader category than species, the actual number of animal pairs would have been significantly less.
Precisely. And when you think about the average size of the animals on the ark,
Right.
it's reasonable to assume it was closer to the size of a sheep, rather than, say, a fully grown elephant.
Right.
Additionally, it's likely that Noah would have taken younger, smaller animals, which would require less space and fewer resources.
Right.
Babies eat less than adults.
That's a good point.
So the analogy of the railroad cars is particularly helpful here. Okay. The source notes that an average double-deck stock car can hold around 240 sheep.
Wow.
So based on the ark's equivalent capacity of over 500 railroad cars, a significant portion, around 210 of those cars in this calculation, could have been dedicated solely to the animals,
Wow.
easily accommodating the estimated number of kinds.
So the crucial takeaway about the ark is that it wasn't about every single species,
Right.
but rather representative kinds. And the ark itself was a vessel of immense capacity.
Exactly.
Yeah, that really paints a clear picture of the ark's potential.
It does.
The source even briefly mentions 2 Peter 3:3-6,
Oh, yes.
which talks about scoffers who willfully forget the flood.
Right.
It seems like this question of the ark has been a point of contention for a long time.
It has indeed, and it continues to be a topic that sparks a lot of debate and discussion.
Absolutely. So moving on.
Okay.
Let's talk about another fascinating point of discussion. The question of how the first 3 days of creation could have been literal 24-hour days.
That's a good one.
If the sun wasn't created until day 4,
Right.
this often brings up questions about the very definition of a day.
Absolutely.
So what does the word day typically mean to us?
Well, as the source points out, dictionaries define it as a 24-hour period,
Right.
usually measured from one midnight to the next.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based on the Earth's rotation relative to the sun.
But if the sun wasn't there for the first 3 days, how could we have had that kind of day?
That's the crux of the question, isn't it?
It is.
And this is where understanding the specific language of Genesis 1 becomes so important.
Okay.
Genesis 1.3 to 5 describes God creating light on that very first day.
Mm-hmm.
He says, and I'll quote here, "Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day."
That's a powerful passage.
It is.
Mm.
And notice how light is created, and day and night are established before the creation of the sun, moon, and stars on day 4, which are described as lights in the firmament.
Mm-hmm.
The Hebrew word used here is meor,
Okay.
which means light bearers or sources of light.
Okay.
But the light created on day 1 is a different Hebrew word, hour.
So the source is drawing a distinction between the initial creation of light itself
Exactly.
and the later creation of the celestial bodies that would then serve as the primary sources of light for the earth.
It's a subtle but really important distinction.
Yes.
The conclusion here is that the sun isn't necessarily a prerequisite for the existence of a day-night cycle.
Okay.
There are many forms of light,
Mm-hmm.
and the Bible clearly states that God created light on day 1.
Right.
Some interpretations even suggest that God himself was the source of this initial light.
Interesting.
Regardless, the key takeaway is that the first 3 days were defined by the presence of light and darkness, evening and morning,
Right.
just as the subsequent days were after the creation of the sun. So there's no compelling reason to interpret these first 3 days as anything other than literal 24-hour periods.
Okay.
It highlights that God's creative power isn't limited by the order in which he created things,
Mm-hmm.
as we might expect them to be ordered based on our current understanding of the universe.
Right.
And I think that's a really important point to keep in mind.
That is a really insightful way to look at it.
Thank you.
So let's move on to another theological point that's often discussed.
Okay.
The timing of Adam's death after he disobeyed God's command not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Right.
Some argue that because Adam didn't physically die immediately, the warning in Genesis 2.17, "In the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die,"
Yes.
must refer only to spiritual death.
Mm.
What perspective does the source material offer on this?
Well, the key to understanding this really lies in a closer examination of the Hebrew phrasing
Okay.
that's used in Genesis 2.16:17. When God warns Adam, saying, "You shall surely die," the original Hebrew actually repeats the word die.
Oh, interesting.
Literally, "dying you shall die."
Wow.
This repetition intensifies the meaning,
Right.
suggesting both an immediate consequence and an ongoing process of dying.
I see.
So while Adam didn't instantly cease to exist physically
Right.
on the day that he ate the fruit,
Right.
he did experience immediate spiritual death,
Mm-hmm.
a separation from God, a breaking of that perfect relationship.
Right.
And he also began the process of physical deterioration that would ultimately lead to his death.
So it's not an either scenario
Exactly.
of physical versus spiritual death,
Right.
but rather an understanding that the warning encompassed both immediate spiritual consequences
Yes.
and the initiation of physical mortality.
It speaks to the comprehensive impact of sin
Absolutely.
on all aspects of human existence.
That makes a lot of sense when you consider the richness of the original language.
It does.
Our final challenge to explore today moves into the realm of science, specifically carbon-14 dating,
Yes.
which is frequently cited as evidence for an Earth and life forms being far older than the biblical timeline suggests.
Right.
So let's start by unpacking the very basics of carbon-14 dating.
Okay, sounds good.
What is it and how does it work?
Well, at its most fundamental level, carbon-14 dating relies on the properties of atoms.
Okay.
And as you know, atoms are made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons.
Right.
carbon exists in several forms called isotopes,
Mm-hmm.
including carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14.
Aye.
They all have 6 protons,
Right.
which makes them carbon,
Right.
but they differ in the number of neutrons.
Yeah.
Carbon-12 is stable. It doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
But carbon-14 is radioactive,
Okay.
meaning it decays over time.
Right.
This decay happens at a very predictable rate known as its half-life.
Okay.
Carbon-14 is constantly being formed in the upper atmosphere,
Uh-huh.
and it's incorporated into living organisms as they breathe and eat.
Right.
When an organism dies, it stops taking in new carbon,
Okay.
and the amount of carbon-14 in its tissues begins to decay.
Right.
So by measuring the remaining amount of carbon-14,
Mm-hmm.
scientists can estimate how long ago that organism died.
I see.
However, because of its half-life, carbon-14 dating is really only considered reliable for materials up to around 80,000 years old.
Okay.
Beyond that, the amount of carbon-14 becomes so tiny that it's extremely difficult to measure accurately.
Right. And this is where the apparent conflict arises.
Exactly.
Because the standard evolutionary timescale proposes vast periods of time,
Mm-hmm.
like the Paleozoic era, supposedly hundreds of millions of years ago, with the first fish and invertebrates.
Right.
Then the Mesozoic with the dinosaurs.
Yes,
finally,
right.
the Cenozoic with mammals. These timescales are way beyond that 80,000-year limit of carbon-14 dating.
They are.
So how do they reconcile that?
Well, that's where the information you've shared presents a really significant challenge to these long evolutionary timescales.
Okay.
The sources highlight findings of measurable carbon-14 in coal samples
Coal sample.
that are allegedly between 37 and 318 million years old.
Oh.
And these samples were collected from 10 different locations around the world.
So it wasn't just a one-off finding.
Exactly. It seems to be a consistent pattern.
Okay.
And according to our understanding of radioactive decay material, that old should contain absolutely no detectable carbon-14.
Right.
So the truly startling insight here is this claim that measurable carbon-14 is being found in materials supposedly millions of years old.
If these findings hold up, what are the implications for the accepted evolutionary timeline?
Well, the conclusion drawn from this evidence, as presented in the sources, is that the presence of measurable carbon-14 in these supposedly ancient materials directly contradicts the idea that the geologic column represents millions upon millions of years of Earth's history.
Okay.
Instead, these findings are seen as supporting a much younger Earth, a time scale that aligns more closely with the biblical account, which describes creation occurring in 6 days, as referenced in the book of Exodus.
That's a pretty significant difference in timescales.
It is, and the source encourages anyone interested in exploring this further to check out New Answers, Book 1, Chapter 7,
Okay.
for a more in-depth look at this evidence and the arguments surrounding it.
This has been an absolutely fascinating deep dive
I agree.
into these commonly raised questions and the thoughtful responses offered.
Yeah, it's been really insightful.
It's been so helpful to unpack these points, from the specifics of Adam's naming task to the complexity surrounding carbon-14 dating.
It highlights a reasoned and consistent approach
Right.
to understanding the biblical text in light of questions that often arise.
For more resources and to explore these topics in even greater detail, be sure to visit Tyrannus Hall Bible College, THBC, at https://www.youtube.com/Tyrannus Hall Bible College.
Absolutely. What's particularly encouraging about the resources you shared is this emphasis on engaging with these questions thoughtfully and critically.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about avoiding difficult questions.
Right.
It's about carefully examining the scriptures, considering scientific findings from different perspectives.
Absolutely.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Right.
a deeper understanding of these perspectives can truly enrich one's faith
Mm-hmm.
and their ability to articulate it with confidence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We certainly hope this deep dive into these common challenges has been insightful and beneficial for you, our listener,
Yeah.
providing clarity and a deeper appreciation for the perspectives presented in the material you so thoughtfully shared.
It's been great discussing this.
It's been really compelling to see how these different angles can be addressed through careful consideration of both scripture and scientific findings.
Absolutely.
And remember, further exploration is always encouraged.
Yes.
Think about the implications of what we've discussed today. How might a deeper understanding of these perspectives shape your own understanding and engagement with these important topics?
That's a great question to ponder.
It is. For even more resources, we encourage you to visit Tyrannus Hall Bible College, THBC, at https://www.youtube.com at Tyrannus Hall Bible College.
It's a wonderful resource.
It is. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive on the Remedify Coaching Program podcast.
It's been a pleasure.
We really appreciate you bringing these important questions to the forefront and allowing us to explore them together.
Indeed, there's always more to learn, and engaging with these challenges with an open mind and a willingness to explore different perspectives can lead to a much richer and more robust understanding of the world around us and the scriptures.
I completely agree. Thank you for listening to the Remedify Coaching Program podcast.